This is a production of Cornell University.
Thank you. Great crowd, so happy to be here. This is actually my 4th trip to New York this year as National Teacher of the Year. I've been here all day at the university, spoke this morning actually at Ithaca College with Ithaca College faculty and also faculty from Cornell. This afternoon had a chance to speak with education majors from Cornell, and now I'm here with you tonight to give you a little bit more broad perspective, not just about my background personally, but what I've been doing this year as National Teacher of the Year and what the conversations are that are going on in America right now related to public education and sort of how we can all be a part of that. So I really appreciate you coming out tonight. And I want to start by telling you just a little bit about myself. As was just mentioned, I did go to Princeton University. And growing up, I thought I always wanted to be a teacher. My mother's a retired elementary school teacher. And in general, I thought being a teacher would be a really great thing to be. That career goal was sort of received in a lukewarm fashion until I decided to enroll at Princeton University, and then the conversation really changed. And then the conversation became, well, you know, those who can do and those who can't teach. And I was asked when I got to Princeton, well, you know, you came to Princeton and all you want to be is a teacher? And what a waste. And I know that some people here at Cornell can relate to that philosophy. And Dr. Duff, actually, sitting up front here, is a fellow Princetonian. We actually graduated from each other 1 year apart, and he thought it would be nice for me to come here and kind of share my perspective on how and why I got into teaching despite considerable social pressure not to do so. But it really all goes back to this journey here. I did start volunteering. I decided when I was at Princeton that, okay, well, maybe I should be something more, so I decided to be pre-med. And in general, that career goal was very well received, so everybody else was happy. And I was plodding along, planning to be pre-med, took the MCATs, did the whole 9 yards, and I thought to myself, well, you know, if I'm not going to do teaching as a career, then by golly, I'm going to go volunteer. And I found myself in this classroom at the New Jersey School for the Deaf with these students who changed my life. They changed my life. And people ask me, they say, well, you know, what was it about that environment? What was it about being with those students that made you completely scrap your pre-med plans and decide to go into teaching? And for anybody who's ever been in a classroom, it's easy to understand because there's this energy, there's this interaction, knowing that you're making a difference every day. I just really wanted to be a part of that. And so I came from this environment to where I am now. And this is a snapshot from my classroom at Urbana High School in Frederick County, Maryland. I've been teaching at the school approximately a total of about 11 years, and I love this picture, and I love to tell people what I see in this picture. I look at this picture, I see progress, because I see roughly an equal mix of male and female students. And remember, this is an AP chemistry class, and that is not always the way it used to be. We are starting to close the gender gap in some of our advanced science subjects, particularly in chemistry and biology. We have more work to do in physics and math and engineering, but we're making progress. I look at the picture and I see some diversity, but not enough. Because the diversity of my own classroom still does not reflect the diversity of my school. And that's a problem, and our work is not finished until it does. The students in my class who have 504 plans or IEPs, which means they have some form of special needs. Over the years, I've accommodated students in my classroom with everything from Asperger's syndrome to dyslexia, dysgraphia, low vision, and people tell me sometimes that those students really have no business being in my class because it's an AP chemistry class, and that should mean something. And perhaps my expectations just aren't high enough. I also look at this picture and I see at least one face that's missing, and it's because that student is at the Career and Technology Center, the vocational student. And somebody asked me, well, why would a student in the vocational program be in your AP chemistry class? That's a conflict. And my question is, why is there only one? I mean, with all the overlap between taking knowledge and applying it, which is what I do in my chemistry class and was what they do in the vocational program, and aren't we really all teaching the same things, that we should be able to make some more progress there? So in between, in the middle of my career, I had the opportunity to teach at the Maryland School for the Deaf. And this is a snapshot of a group of students that I taught while I was there. Maryland School for the Deaf is a very interesting place. Even though that Maryland is a small state, it's a very diverse state. And this school draws students from all over the state. So students from our inner cities, students from our eastern shore, the beach areas, students from the mountains and everything in between. And not just students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but students who have different varying levels of hearing loss. So for example, I taught some students here who were born deaf and grew up with families using American Sign Language. I taught other students who were not diagnosed with their deafness till much later in life. So they came to me at the high school level, maybe not knowing any sign language at all. And of course, at this particular school, all of the instruction was through American Sign Language. We didn't use voice at all. So sometimes in my chemistry physics class, I would have a student who maybe was growing up with spoken Spanish in the home, had no idea about ASL, but yet we're in my chemistry and physics class trying to learn through ASL. So it's a very complicated, dynamic situation. So basically, I've been hanging out the better part of the past 15 years, teaching everybody's favorite subject. And I can see that that's true here by the show of hands, about how many of you this is really a favorite subject. And of course, I'm just kidding. Obviously, chemistry is not everybody's favorite subject. But as educators, as a teacher, it's my job to somehow bring this to everybody. And usually when people hear chemistry, they think of one of two things. They either think about the facts and the formulas that they despise so much, or they think about the fun stuff. They think about the fun stuff. And yeah, there's fun stuff in chemistry. My students love to do lab activities. And of course, I try to engage them in everything that I can. When students come into my classroom, really every day, they want to know two things, right? They have two questions for me. First, they want to know, are we going to burn something today? That's number one. And if we're not going to burn something, the question is, are we going to blow something up? Right? That's what students want to do in a chemistry class. And so yes, as a teacher trying to engage my students, I try to bring them in any way that I can. I know that most of my students are really into the Harry Potter series, and they've seen the movies, and they see that big green flu network. Do you know what I'm talking about if you've seen the movie? And they know that's chemistry, and they say, oh, that's so cool. Can we do that in your class? And I say, sure, we can do that. And we set up little green flu networks all over the countertops. And then they see how they burn green, and they say, oh, can we make them red? And I say, yeah, we can do that. And then we turn them red. And then they want to know why. And then you can actually teach them something. I have students in my class who swear up and down that they are not science people. I am not a science person. You are not going to turn me into a science person. They say I am a history person. And I say, well, that's fine. There's a lot of science in history. We talk about things like the Hindenburg explosion. And all of my history buffs can tell me all about that, and they've seen the video and they've read the theories, and then they say, yeah, that was a really amazing explosion, and then they make the connection, and they say, explosion. Can we do that? Can we do that in your classroom? And I say, yeah, sure, we can do that. We can take balloons and we can fill them up with hydrogen gas, and in a carefully controlled situation, we can explode those little mini hydrogen balloons so they can get a sense for what that history was like. I've never met a student from anywhere who doesn't want to set off an alcohol cannon. It's just one of those universally appealing things. And as a teacher, I would be crazy not to tap into that. But it's not all about fun and games and entertainment. It's really so that our students wind up with a serious look on their face, so that they get engaged. Better yet, to have this look of pride on their face. And I love this particular picture because Rochelle's lab work is reflected in her goggles with that sense of pride of having mastered something really, truly difficult. And with everything that we know about data these days, and there's a lot of talk in education about data, action research, collect the data, what does it mean? And that's all important, but I've learned over the years and having starting in deaf education that I get just as much information out of looking at students' faces, and that's something that I've done all along. But then last May 3rd, I found myself in a very unlikely place for a public school teacher, with the President of the United States to my right and the Secretary of Education to my left, standing with the 55 state and territorial teachers of the year. And knowing in that moment that I was no longer a chemistry teacher hanging out in my classroom, blowing up stuff and doing cool labs with my students, that I was now a spokesperson for public education, representing all teachers, early childhood teachers, elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers from all subject areas. And it would be my job for a year to find the themes that connect us all. Now, as a little time out, you might be thinking, how exactly do you wind up in that place? I mean, really, how would you get chosen for something like that? What is the process? And I'll just make a long story very, very short. But it actually started at my school level. The faculty that I worked with in my school nominated me, put me on the ballot to apply for Teacher of the Year, and I told them I didn't want to do it. I said I don't want to do it because it would take too much time away from my students. Because with any process like this, it's a process. There's a lot of essay writing. There are face-to-face interviews. And all the while, you never think that you're going to go very far anyway, so I did start the process because I was very honored to be nominated. And then I was named Teacher of the Year at my county level in Frederick County in Maryland. And then all of the county teachers went to the state level. And then I went through another series of evaluations at the state level, and then I was named the Maryland Teacher of the Year. And then once you're named your state Teacher of the Year, then all of those application materials get sent to the national committee. And at that point, the game changes a little bit, because at that point, if you're your state Teacher of the Year, it's pretty much a given that everybody's fabulous in the classroom. Everybody's doing amazing things in the classroom. And so from that pool of 55, 4 finalists were selected, of which I was one. We were all brought into Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., we were put through a series of evaluations that would simulate what we would do as National Teacher of the Year. We had a classic interview where we had to answer questions. We had to do a mock TV interview, like a Good Morning America. We had to do a press conference. I had to do a keynote speech. We had to do a working networking dinner. So different situations that would evaluate our ability to be a spokesperson, which is what this year is all about. People look at this picture and they think that I have a direct line to the President and the Secretary of Education. I do not. I do not. Everything that I do is by invitation, and it's not a role where you are seated with the policymakers. That's not the purpose of the year, though I have had some opportunities to interact with them both. That's certainly not the focus. But I have, as I like to say, just been teaching in a larger classroom. I mean, I've told myself all along that the key word in National Teacher of the Year is teacher. You know, I am still a teacher. I'm always a teacher. I've always considered myself a teacher. But I have a much bigger classroom, much bigger audience this year. If you look at the map, everything that's shaded in hot pink shows you where I have been as National Teacher of the Year. And many of those states, multiple visits. I mean, 4 visits to New York, 3 to Texas, 3 to Mississippi. History people, please forgive me, geography folks, but yes, China and Japan floating around there aimlessly in the ocean. I have been to China and Japan. Obviously, the map is not to scale. Also heading to Singapore at the end of May. So that'll be 3 international trips on my schedule. You see that Arkansas is shaded orange instead of pink. That's because I took a virtual trip to Arkansas. I went to Arkansas via Skype, and I spoke with a group of teachers about this large, just through the screens. So pretty amazing how technology is really bringing people together. And in yellow, you see the states that I will continue to visit and speak in even after my term officially ends on June 1st. And you say, well, how come you didn't go to Nevada, and how come you didn't go to Minnesota? Remember, it's all by invitation. I can't decide. So, for example, I'm still waiting on an invitation to Hawaii. You know, I'm still waiting. I'd love to go. I think I have a lot to say to educators there, but unfortunately that just hasn't come through. So it's all by invitation. And to some extent, invitations, there are conflicts. So for example, I was scheduled to go to South Dakota, but then the Japan trip came up, so then the South Dakota event fell off my schedule. So those sorts of things happen. But basically, as I go around the country, not only am I sharing what I'm doing and what's going on in education, I'm learning, and also I'm asking and answering a lot of questions. And what's interesting is, as I travel, a lot of the questions that I get asked, particularly by the media, are of a very urgent, point-blank nature. For example, this is the first question I was ever asked in a phone interview. What's the secret? Right? What's the secret? To teaching, of course. As if I have that secret, written down on a little piece of paper and folded up and in a lockbox in my classroom, and if I would somehow just let it out, then somehow everything would be okay. What's the secret? Here's another one. Why can't we fix our schools? Right? Why can't we just fix our schools? And by the way, give it to me in 20 seconds or less, because that's all you have for this soundbite. Because we do live in this soundbite culture, and people are only willing to listen for so long. And so I've learned, as every state teacher and national teacher has learned, that if you have something to say to the media, you better say it quickly and make your point, because otherwise the conversation is going to change very quickly. I love this one. This next question is, yes, I understand that there are so many challenges in education, but if you had a magic wand. I love that. If you had a magic wand. And I got to a certain point where I had been asked that question so many times that I just flat out said in an interview, I don't have a magic wand, no one does. I mean, that's the truthful answer. That is the truthful answer. It was on public television. In fact, nobody has a magic wand. It's just not that simple. And I know that here in America, we like that quick fix. We want that easy answer. We want to try to pretend that there's just one thing that could make everything right, despite the diversity of our nation, and it's not just true. But I understand that these questions are all designed to get at what the real issue is. And the real issue is, how do we reach all students? That's what really weighs on everybody's mind, is the equity issue. We still admit that in our country, there are pockets of excellence, that's for sure. And then there are pockets of great need. And that there are huge disparities in access and resources for students. Sometimes the disparity is separated by just a matter of miles. And everybody's trying to figure out why that continues and what we can do about it. But it's a good-natured question. I mean, how do we reach all students? And you know, now that I'm a parent myself, this question is very, very important to me. So this is my little girl, Carly. And she's sitting with the boy she says she's going to marry. And they are at their preschool graduation. Yeah, their preschool graduation. And I noticed that some people in the audience said, "Oh, like, isn't that cute?" And that's great. And some people laugh when I say that. They're like, "Preschool graduation? Like, are you serious? Like, how silly?" To which I say, you know, is it really that silly? Is it really that silly if we're going for equity here, that from the youngest possible age, to have absolutely every child wear that cap and gown and hold that piece of paper so that they will believe that they too will be what we're calling these days, and you've probably heard the term, college and career ready. And I put that in quotes because we're not going to debate it at the moment. But the point is that if we think about our own children or a child very close to us in our lives, we know exactly what that means. I know what it means for my daughter to be college ready, career ready, life ready, world ready. I know everything I want her to be in my mind. I don't need to see it spelled out on a checklist. I don't need it to be in a manual or a curriculum or a set of standards. I know what that is. And you know, her little boyfriend, I don't know him very well. But it's my job as an educator to want for other people's children what I want for my own. And as we work towards this equity that we all desire so much, I think if we can just keep that very simple fact in mind, that moves us a huge step forward. So just to give you an idea of how that conversation is playing out over the country, I'm going to take a week from my schedule as national teacher and just show you the different conversations that I'm involved in. And I can't necessarily say that this week is typical, but it'll give you an idea of some of the things that I've been doing. If we flash back to November, first I was involved in a conference regarding educator effectiveness. Big deal right now. It's about teachers and how we're going to evaluate them, and what makes an effective teacher, and what makes an exceptional teacher, and how do we spell that all out in a form that's somehow fair and perhaps could be linked to compensation. That's a big issue. So my day on Monday, November 14th, started with that issue. And then I went down to Washington, D.C. for a congressional briefing where we were talking about the AP chemistry redesign. Curriculum is a big issue in the discussion in the country right now. What are we going to teach kids? And even something with a long-standing tradition like the AP programs, they're even looking at their curriculum and redesigning it and trying to make it less facts, more application, less memorization, more inquiry. So the tests are changing. Everything's changing really effective immediately. So I was weighing in on that. Then I went to a Women's Heritage Center to a STEM exhibit. Again, equity is still on everybody's minds. We're trying to figure out, how do we get more women into STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics? How do we get more individuals from minority backgrounds into STEM? And so any event that kind of highlights that is something that I would be involved in. You know, we need to celebrate what's going on in our public schools so that we know what to replicate and to emulate. You turn on the news on any given night, and you hear a lot of things that we're not doing right in the public schools. I mean, that dominates the conversation. But there are a lot of celebrations that go on, and it's very important because otherwise we don't know what's truly working. So I found myself at the Blue Ribbon Schools ceremony with Arnie Duncan, celebrating great things happening. And then I found myself later that day, again, celebrating American Education Week, because it's really important that we get these positive stories out in the news. I mean, I suggested in my National Teacher of the Year application, I mean, imagine if the national news began each evening with a segment titled Highlights in American Public Education, that actually celebrate what's really working, what's really going on, that's good in our public schools. Not only would we be celebrating it, but we would know what to emulate and what to replicate. We don't know enough about the great things that are really going on. As I travel the country, people say, oh, Michelle, have you heard about this going on here? Have you heard about this program? And I say, yeah, no, I really haven't. Because we don't get that message out there nearly enough. So that's obviously an issue of concern. The next day, I found myself with students. I found myself with the little people. At a local elementary school, I was speaking to kindergartners, first graders, all the way up to fifth graders and their parents. And what I found really interesting at that student assembly, and that was a different situation for me because remember, I'm a high school teacher, but they corralled them all into the cafeteria like you probably remember when you were in elementary school, and everybody was sitting in nice, neat rows, just like their teachers told them, with their legs folded, crisscross applesauce and all that. And they're all looking up at me. And when I grabbed the mic that day, I actually hesitated for a minute before I started speaking because I thought to myself, man, I better be good. Because I've got the future sitting there staring back at me. And whatever I say is going to stick in their brains, and I better be good. And I asked them some questions that day. Now, I'm not fool enough to open up a question to 500 kindergartners and have them all call out and screaming, but I taught them a little bit of sign language. I taught them yes, and I taught them no. And I asked the kindergartners, I asked them if they thought I looked like a scientist. And over half of them said no. Now, tell me why a 5-year-old would tell me that I don't look like a scientist. I mean, on what basis? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I have long hair and it's kind of curly? How do these images and these perceptions get ingrained in our children so early? And little kids are very honest, so they'll tell you that. So we really have some work to do in our country with perceptions, starting from our very young children in believing, who could be a scientist, who could be a college graduate, who could be a professional. We need to do a lot with perceptions. Later that day, I found myself with my own little girl at her parent day at her school, and then I caught a plane to go to Phoenix. And in Phoenix, I went to a policy conference. When I go to a policy conference, I'm usually the only teacher there. I am the teacher voice, the teacher voice. And in that particular situation, at this particular event, we went on a tour of a vocational school. We have a lot of students in our country who are on a vocational track. This is just a fact, and we have to serve their needs. We also have to understand our vocational students, because vocational students also have college plans. I got news for you. And often they have very big goals, and they have it all figured out, because they explain it to me. They say, yeah, I'm going to graduate from high school, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to save money, then I'm going to go to college, then I'm going to go back and start my own business. So it's very unfair of us to put people on tracks and say, well, you're either vocational or you're academic, because there's so much crossover. So I had a chance to go to that school, a little more chat on educator effectiveness, a little bit of networking, and then finally I was done giving my own keynote. And you might think about this week that I just described, and somebody asked me once, they said, what do you do when you get sick? It's just not on the schedule. It just doesn't happen. Fortunately, I've had a very good year, but I've not gotten sick. But that particular week, I got to go home on Sunday. And you say, well, that's nice. At least you get to go home every Sunday. No, I don't get to go home every Sunday. It just happened that Sunday I got to go home. And I've appreciated everybody who's asked about my family. Obviously, this is a tremendous sacrifice for my little girl and for my husband. And people ask if my family can travel with me, and they really can't, because they have their lives in Maryland. My little girl's in school. She's in first grade. She's working on her art. She's working on her public speaking. She's working on her little science experiments. There's my husband, who's currently winning the Husband of the Year award as I travel 80-90% of the time. And there was one time in November or December where they did get to travel with me to Arizona. NBC was having a big celebration of education. It happened to be at an NFL event. We had never been to an NFL game before, so this was a quick 2-day trip. Of course, we got all the gear, and we do wear that gear back in Maryland, even though we are in Steelers and Ravens territory. We boldly wear that Cardinals gear back at home. So every now and then, they might be able to join me for something, but usually I'm off on my own. I spend a lot of time at universities and colleges. Cornell is obviously not my first. I've done a lot of colleges and universities over the course of the year. And I see a lot of interesting things going on. A lot of the conversation is the same. How do we best prepare our teacher candidates? Last week I was at Ole Miss, and they took me to a room where I saw this on the screen. Has anybody seen this before? I thought, wow, what is this? This is something called Teach Live that actually came out of the University of Central Florida. And basically it's a classroom, an empty classroom with a screen with digital avatar virtual children. And these children on the screen can be programmed. to have different personalities, different learning challenges. And the idea is that a teacher in training will step into that room with the students on the screen and practice teaching them before they get in front of live children. This is new to me. I just saw this last week. I don't know what I think about it because I'm still trying to reflect and process it. But as I say, when I travel, not only am I sharing things from my own perspective, but I'm learning about the different things that are going on. And I tell you, things are really rapidly changing in education. I was at Manhattanville College in Purchase, New York, talking with teacher candidates there. Went to Kent State, Ohio, then I came back to New York for a STEM panel. And again, this is another situation where I am the only teacher on the panel, and then a little bit more with career tech and on to Texas. So it gives you an idea of kind of the schedule and things that people are talking about. I think one of the most valuable experiences for me this year as national teacher is to be in close contact with the business community and hear about what they want our students to be able to do. And it's a very different conversation often that we're having in the education world. You know, where we are in education right now, we talk a lot about curriculum and testing and scores and standards. Very interesting to have conversations with people from the business world who have a whole different set of expectations for our students. And sometimes they'll say point blank, you know, I don't care if you have a straight A student who can get 5s on every AP test, if they can't also step up and take a leadership role, work with self-confidence, be resilient and adaptable and reflective and independent and resilient, and all these other factors that they want our students to be. In fact, I went to a science facility in Spokane, Washington, and I point blank asked the researchers there, I said, if I could transport you back to Urbana High School to talk with my students, what would you tell them is the most important thing that they need to succeed in your scientific facility? And one of the researchers said the ability to think critically and to analyze and to reason. And one of them said the ability to solve problems creatively, to work without a manual, to move forward, you know, even when things go wrong. And then the third said something very interesting. She said, your students need to be able to see beyond themselves. To see beyond themselves. And that's a very interesting perspective. And as we teach, and we think about how we're going to teach all these different things, I mean, where is the app for that? Where is the technology that's going to help me teach my students to see beyond themselves? But there's all these expectations that our students are going to have as finished products when they graduate from high school, when you graduate from college. That people are going to expect you to be all these things, and that somehow through education we're providing all of that. And it kind of sums up here in a visual like this. You know, as we go about curriculum and objectives and testing and mastering material, we also have to be thinking about all these things in every subject area: literacy and problem solving, communication, presentation, critical thinking. And I tell you, it's that little blue box, self-management. That's what people really want. When you graduate from college, when you graduate from high school, to have all those interpersonal skills. And you know, that's a lot to teach. It's a lot to teach. But we're not having this conversations going on the other side of the world. Had the opportunity to go to China, met with the Director General of Education in China. And they're having some of the same conversations. Specifically, they need great teachers too, because they have a lot of people to educate. And we said, well, what are you doing to get great teachers into the profession? And they shared that a few years ago they started a program where they were offering full scholarships to talented students in exchange for a 10-year commitment to teaching. That's quite a commitment. We don't have anything here in the United States that rivals that or matches that, a 10-year commitment to teaching. They also talked about the dire need to have teachers in the rural areas. That's a similar situation that we have here in the U.S., not being able to get teachers for certain regions. Had the opportunity to visit with some vocational students, had the opportunity to meet with a chemistry department at Bayi High School. And it's very interesting because when I went to China, based on what I hear from the media, I thought that we'd be having a conversation about test scores, right? Because that's what the media likes to talk about, everybody's test scores and comparing each other. Well, you know what? That group of teachers didn't want to talk about test scores. They didn't even bring up test scores. They had all sorts of questions for me about how do you encourage students to be creative thinkers? How do you encourage students to come up with original ideas? How do you encourage students to innovate? How do you get past paper and pencil exercises? Because they really see the shift in the world as it's changing today, that whoever can do all that, can innovate and be creative, that they're going to have the advantage, and they're really looking for ideas for how to make that happen there. Had the opportunity to talk with some teachers. This young lady I was sharing with the education students today, I asked her what it's like to teach in China, how she would describe it, and she just came up with one word. She just says, it's tiring. It's tiring. And anybody who's ever taught understands why that word was used, tiring. And we talked a little bit about that with the students today. Went on to Japan, met with the Deputy Minister of Education in Japan. The very first thing he wanted to talk about was, how do we get STEM into the elementary school years? Realizing that high school is too late to start getting students interested in serious science. And what were we doing to bring science education to the elementary school levels? And of course, that's a struggle for us here. In a lot of areas, even in my daughter's elementary school, science is still pushed to the back burner because we have this focus on testing, and Common Core standards, of course, are coming on, and that's giving even more focus to English and, of course, math. And so when do you do the science? But yet everybody wants all these scientists for the future. How are we going to create them if we don't start from the youngest possible age? And in Japan, they realize that that's an issue as well. I took a little Japanese in college, so I had a little bit of working knowledge. They welcomed me warmly with the traditional tea ceremonies and all of that, so that was really nice. Had a chance to visit a broad range of schools in Japan. They were very, very eager to show me everything. Took me to something they called a super science school. A super science school. And this is one of these highly selective schools that has absolutely everything, all the latest technology, all of the on-site research facility. And when we drove away from that school, my host said to me, I want you to understand that that is the exception. That is the exception. And then I visited many other schools that would be comparable to many of the schools that we have here. Good schools, but not necessarily the latest of everything. They also took me to a school that served students with special needs and students that have issues with truancy, and trying to figure out how to include those students in the system. And I think probably the most, people say, what's been the highlight of your year? What's been the moment that's been the most impactful? I would have to say it would be the end of my trip where I went to Onagawa City, Japan. Now, because this is such a large screen, I think you're going to be able to see what I'm getting at, and we'll zoom in a minute. But they took me to a region that had been devastated by the tsunami. And at the very beginning of the week, I had a full schedule of events. I had to meet with the minister, and I had to give presentations and meet with teachers and all that. They said at the end of the week, the very last thing, they said, would you teach a class to our students? They said, we have this group of students, we'll bring you in with some sixth graders, they have lost everything. Will you come teach a class? And so, of course, somebody says, teach, class, and I haven't taught for many, many months, and so I start thinking about the labs we can do, I start thinking about what I'm going to need and the curriculum, and I said, what do you have? And they said, nothing. They said, we don't have anything. But they still wanted me to create this magical, amazing moment for their students. And again, just to give you a little bit of a picture, if we zoom in a little bit, this was still the situation when I was there in October after the tsunami hit in March. I mean, everything just completely pushed off into piles. It really cannot be captured by a camera. But where there were buildings standing, still debris just strewn all over the place everywhere. People's personal belongings just still scattered, amidst the streets. And I was led around by this wonderful man, a teacher, who's actually standing on the site where his home was washed away. His home was standing where the yellow flowers are. And he's pointing up to the school, and of course the school being high on the hill, the lives of the students and the teachers were spared because the tsunami hit at 3:30 in the afternoon, while many of their parents and the workers in the village below were just washed away. And so this was the school he asked me to go teach in. And again, I thought, wow, if I'm going to make this great, we got to have something. I said, well, what can we do? So we spent the entire week just trying to round up the materials for one 1-hour lab. And I talked to my students at Urbana about this when I visited in January. I said, when you think about what you have, the access, the resources, the choices, everything that we have here, that's all yours to take advantage of. I said, it took us a whole week, like 6 adults, scrounging materials for one lab. And I asked for scissors. I asked for rulers. I asked for aluminum foil and trays, very basic stuff. And I asked them if they could get me some bubble gum. I said, because if you can get me some bubble gum, remember this is 6th grade, I thought we could do a cool experiment where you figure out the percentage of sugar in bubble gum. And I said, that would be really fun for them. And my host said, well, I don't know. I don't know if we can get bubble gum, and even if we get it, I don't know if our students are going to know what to do with it. Because it's not like America where kids just walk into the store and buy some bubble gum and that's it. I said, well, let's get it and let's see how it goes. Let's try it anyway. And as you can probably see, they figured out what to do with the bubble gum, right? I mean, one thing that I have learned, that I've truly learned this year in traveling, both in the United States and internationally, is that people are people everywhere. Students are students everywhere, and teachers are teachers everywhere. I mean, we are all connected by the same dreams and flaws and hopes and challenges. I mean, it's all just truly universal. We're really not all that different. We're all working towards the same goals. And this was just kind of a moment for me that I guess if I had to pick one out for the year, that just really set in as really powerful. And not many days go by that I don't think about these students on the other side of the world with nothing. I mean, they're living in makeshift trailers, and their teachers are living in trailers, and they're trying to go about everyday life and do everything that we're trying to do and master all these skills and all this curriculum with absolutely nothing. And it's a very powerful moment. I get caught up in a lot of the debates on education. One of the debates that I get caught up in is, haven't students changed? You say students are students everywhere, but these are different students now. These are different people. These are digital natives. They've all grown up with all this technology, and somehow that makes them different. And that's a long debate, and we can certainly get into it. And as I said to students today, technology has done amazing things for all of us, and will continue to do so. I embrace technology. I've seen it do amazing things for students with special needs. But the bottom line is, when you think about everything that we want for our students, a computer cannot talk a student out of dropping a class. And a piece of technology cannot inspire a child to be the first in their family to go to college. And I don't know of any gadget that can teach a student to see beyond himself. So, yes, there's technology. There are tools of technology, but there are teachers and there are people, and that's where the real power is. It's a people enterprise, and we need as much power, people power, as we can get. As I said, people asked me, why did you even do this? You came to Princeton and all you're going to be as a teacher, and I know that that's not unique to Princeton, that message is conveyed on many, many college campuses and universities across the country, that if you're going to be somebody, you've got to be something other than a teacher. Had the opportunity to go back to Princeton and visit the school where I originally started to volunteer, and go back to my roots, and this is a photograph taken almost 20 years ago, and I actually connected with my experience from Japan, because when I was volunteering at the New Jersey School for the Deaf, we really didn't have what we needed either. And if you look at the countertops, we're doing a physics lab, and we're using Hot Wheels cars, and we're using track to try to do force experiments and acceleration, because as teachers, that's what we do. We do what we need to do, and we scrounge for materials when we need them. Had a chance at that visit in February to reunite with my cooperating teacher. We were reminiscing about how we used to beg for materials. This was back in the day. I say back in the day, this is 1994. This was back in the day. I'm actually feel really good that I'm old enough to say, back in my day. This was when film for cameras used to come in those containers. Do you know what I'm talking about? Some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. These little black containers with the gray lids. And I remember that we used to go and we used to beg these stores that developed film, and we'd say, hey, before you, don't just throw those things out, can you donate those to the school? Because if we could have those little containers, we could change the mass of the pennies inside, we could hang them on strings and do pendulum experiments. What I was doing back in 1994 wasn't so different than what I was doing in Japan in the Tsunami region, just making do and trying to bring the best possible education that we could to the kids. It's interesting, we brought over some gate timers at the time, the wooden contraptions you see on the wall there, and you see the surprised look in my face to find out that they're still using those same gate timers 16 years later after I volunteered at the school. And I think that's what's the really amazing thing about teaching, is that you just have this, you leave this footprint. You just have this impact everywhere you go, and often you never know what that impact is because you never hear about it. How would I have known if I hadn't visited that school 16 years later that they're still using the same gate timers? But that's the thing, if for all of you who go into teaching, or you're thinking about going into teaching, you think, I don't know if I'm going to make... you make a difference the minute you walk in the door. The minute you step in the door, you start making a difference. And all the energy that you pour into it comes back to you. And it's really amazing to be part of that continuum and that history. You know, at Princeton, had the opportunity to visit with some professors from the teacher preparation program. A lot of people think that because I went to Princeton, I'm TFA, right? Princeton, Teach for America, right? I'm not TFA, teacher prep. Because when I decided to be a teacher, I decided to be a teacher. I decided to make that commitment. And I decided to pour my life into it. And I knew that I was going to do it for more than 2 years and make the biggest difference that I could. Had the chance to meet with the teacher preparation students at Princeton and kind of dismayed to find out that not much has changed. The same social pressure that I felt not to go into teaching 20 years ago is the same social pressure that they feel now not to go into teaching. And I know that there are people in this room who can relate to that phenomenon. And the question always comes up, well, what do we do about that? Very, very difficult to change public perception once it gels. And I don't have a great answer for that question. Had the opportunity to tour their new chemistry facility, got together with my chemistry professors from years ago, had a great discussion about STEM and how it's progressed, and in the nicest possible way said at the end, you know, well, Michelle, this is really great and it's fantastic, you've achieved all this, but if you just wanted to be a teacher, you didn't need to come to Princeton. And round the conversation goes. Again, because it's so ingrained. But what's very interesting, I think, is that as a society, we really like to talk out of both sides of our mouths. Because on the one hand, we say we want the absolute best possible and the brightest teachers for our students. And I haven't heard anybody say any different. I have not been anywhere in this country where anybody says, oh yeah, you know, it's okay if we don't have great teachers. That's all right. Absolutely everybody wants the best teacher for their child. It doesn't matter where you're from, what your political affiliation is. Nobody says it's okay not to have a great teacher. On the other hand of the coin, we take people who have the qualifications and the interest and the background and all the personal skills who want to go into teaching, and we say, why are you doing that? So again, it's a very interesting paradox. And of course, I've been completely caught up in that particular conversation. You know, people ask me what it is about teaching that I love so much that makes it so difficult. Talked about it a little bit today, but I think what's really important, I know to all teachers, is yes, we all have advanced and often multiple degrees. Yes, we can juggle lots of balls in the classroom and we can solve problems and we know our content and we can, you know, master the curriculum and we can do this and that. But the bottom line is what we have to be on a daily basis, all the time, every day, without a break. And I think when the teacher in China said, you know, teaching is tiring, you know, the first thing that came to my mind wasn't the paper grading, and it wasn't the meetings, and it wasn't the curriculum and the planning lessons. It was all these things that you have to be all day, every day. Everything from passionate to creative to engaging to dedicated and fearless, and you're pouring your energy into other people all the time, and you're left at the end of the day with absolutely nothing. And you're just completely drained, and all you want to do is go to bed and take a nap. And you wonder how you're going to get up the next day and do it all again. But then you think about the students, and you know that they're going to feed that energy right back into you. And that's what gets you out of bed to do it all again. You know, I think my biggest pet peeve as I've traveled is to hear a teacher say, I'm just a teacher. I mean, really? I'm just a teacher? And again, we don't have time at the moment to go into all the things that a teacher has to be, but I'm just a teacher? Actually, I've asked teachers to make just a simple change to that statement. I mean, I am a teacher. I am a teacher. And it's quite a difficult sell sometimes to explain what that's all about. And again, people can only listen for so long, and everybody wants it in a soundbite. Well, in conclusion here, there's this very interesting contest where they asked people to send in 6 words, what it means to be a teacher. Again, soundbite culture, right? 6 words. And I went to the website and I looked at all the different entries, and some of them were very nifty and impressive and catchy. For example, one of them said, teachers hold ladders that students climb. There's your 6 words. Teachers hold ladders that students climb. It's a nice image. There was another one that was a little bit more science-y that said, teachers point out the stars, provide rockets. Okay, again, I like the scientific imagery, but I was reading through the list, and there was one that really made me sit back in my chair that I thought, yes, this is what describes in 6 words teachers and really everybody engaged in education. Attributed to somebody named Amanda W. in Nevada. And I really appreciate her words. Yes, selflessly dedicated to someone else's success. That is what it means to be a teacher. Selflessly dedicated to someone else's success. And for me, there have been a lot of those someone else's. I knew a long time ago that I was going to need something to remind me why I decided to become a teacher in the first place. Because it's a very, very demanding job. There are days it's extremely difficult for me to get out of bed at 4:45 in the morning, which is the time that I have to get up to make it to my school on time to teach. And there are nights when I listen to the news and I hear the conversation about education, how negative it's all become, and I just want to run from it, and that's just the honest truth. But then I get to school and I know that this is waiting for me. And I decided a long time ago not to cover my bulletin boards with messages or calendars or postings, but just to cover my bulletin boards with the faces of students, so that I would always remember why I decided to be a teacher and what I'm doing there. And I go to my classroom and I see pictures of students from the School for the Deaf who won their academic bowl championship. I see pictures of students who have gone on to be scientists and engineers. I see pictures of students who have gone on to be teachers. I see pictures of students who have given their lives for our country. And it's been a great honor for me as I have traveled this year to represent students and represent teachers and to really spread the message that, public education, the key word is public. It's for everybody. And it's a human business. And everybody has something to contribute. I mean, you don't have to be the National Teacher of the Year to take an interest in a child's education, right? You don't have to be a chemistry teacher to get involved with your local community and whatever's going on with STEM or science. I mean, everybody has the ability to inspire students to see beyond themselves, that it's really a human business, and it's that human factor that makes all the difference. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here tonight. Absolutely. I mean, my first full year of teaching was actually in my public school classroom. And you're right, you're probably going to have, it's very likely you'll have a difficult situation. You might have between 30 and 40 students in a class. You might be pushing a cart. You might not have enough books, enough desks. I mean, again, there's this, when you start off, we all have this starry-eyed image of going into the classroom and changing the world and how magical it's all going to be. And then you realize you're dealing with people. And you're dealing with difficult situations and often not the resources that you need. The first year of teaching is tough, but the 15th year of teaching is tough too, in a different way. I think the hardest part when you step into that classroom for the first time is realizing that despite public perception, this is not an easy job. And it will consume you 24 hours a day. Because not only does it take that long just to get the lessons planned and the materials together and make sure you're grading the work and analyzing your data and attending whatever meeting you have to do, and maybe you're in extracurricular activities and you're trying to keep up with latest technology and curriculum and all that. It's 24/7. Not to mention the fact that you care about kids. So you're laying awake at night, like thinking about Johnny or Bobby or thinking about, what you did or said or didn't. And it's all consuming. And a lot of people bolt after the first few years because it's not what they expected. And I think it's really important to understand that as you embark on your first classroom, A, it's not going to be easy. And B, if you're the type of person that really loves a challenge, and not just a challenge, but something that's dynamic. Every day is different. Every student is different. Nothing that you do will ever work the same way twice. I mean, I'm a 15-year teacher, and I'm still every day looking at every class as a new class, and every kid's a different kid. And if you love that sort of complexity, then you will love teaching. And the energy that you put into it will come back to you. And that's what will feed you and keep you going. It's like I say to my budding scientists, I said, if you're the type of person who wants immediate answers, you probably shouldn't be in research science, because there are people who work their entire lives on a scientific problem and just take one step towards the overall picture because they love the process. And they love the process, and that's why they do it. And I think it's the same thing in teaching. You have to be able to embrace the chaos. You embrace the chaos and you realize that you are making a difference, right? I mean, teachers change lives. They really do. Not every day is a Kodak moment. And sometimes those moments are few and far between. But you're changing lives. And it's a great honor to change a life, even one life. And as a teacher, you have the opportunity to change so many. So keep that in mind. And put that message on your desk, selflessly dedicated to someone else's success. And that will keep you going through that first year. Great question. And good luck to you. That's a fantastic point. I mean, everybody's involved, everybody has a role, and thank goodness for that, because kids need all the support that they can get. And you brought up parents. I mean, talking about parents, that's like a whole other hour-long discussion. It really is. And I mean, parents are the most important people in a child's life, and that's just a fact. And nobody has greater power than the parent to positively affect a child's academic success. And one of the things that I talk about with new teachers is that it's important to sort out like parent contact and parent involvement. Like these days, a lot of times we think, well, you know, I posted a message on my webpage, so I contacted the parent, and that's good enough. That's not good enough. We have to involve our parents, you're right, because they play a big role. For me, it's very interesting because a lot of parents think they can't be involved with what I do because I teach AP chemistry. And a lot of parents either say, well, you know, I never took chemistry, I took chemistry but I hated it, I took chemistry but it was 25 years ago, and they feel that they can't be involved. So it's my job as a teacher, yes, to bring them in. Meaning one of the things I try to do is I try to give my parents a list of ways they can be involved, like a menu of options for how they can support their child. And it's the same thing with community members. I think as teachers, we need to do a better job of reaching out and telling people, you know, here's what we need from our parents, here's what we need for our community, because often people want to help and they just don't know how, because it hasn't been spelled out for them. Obviously, your building administrator has a huge impact. I've been very fortunate to work with administrators who have encouraged me to take risks. I mean, that's how I get, you know, 100 kids into AP chemistry, because I've been allowed to take risks. That's how I went to the Maryland School for the Deaf and brought them AP chemistry for the first time, because there was a principal who said, let's forge ahead, let's do it, be the flagship program. You know, so yes, the administrator has an absolutely important role. Everybody has a role to play. You're right. And to be honest, even with technology, which you think would bring us all together to communicate more effectively, it's got to be that face-to-face. You got to have that face-to-face. The technology doesn't do it for us. It really doesn't. That's a great question. Absolutely, and the goal of the AP class is not just to pass the test. Right. And you're absolutely right. And again, just to use the example that I used from the conversation, I don't care how many of your kids pass the AP exam if they can't also do this. And that's a hard sell to students sometimes, especially in these economic times, because students and their parents will associate that score with a GPA, which gets associated with a scholarship, which gets you into college. So the conversation has really changed in the past few years with even more of an emphasis and a pressure from students and parents to make sure that teachers are helping them get that score. But let me turn my answer around in a slightly different fashion, because you talked about the score issue. I accept students into my class who I know their prognosis on the exam is not assured. I mean, it's just what I decided to do many years ago. I just decided to cast the widest net. And I'll use one student as an example. She took my class. It was a big risk. You know, she didn't have all the skills she needed. And in the end, she did not pass the test. She got a 2. And so if on that basis, she is a failure and so am I. Right? But if you look at the bigger picture, and I think that's what you're getting at, the bigger picture, that student, because of what she learned in my class, and again, that focus on the critical thinking and the communication, all those other skills, she carried all that with her to her next AP Science class, and she was successful. And then she carried that on to be the first in her family to go to college and major in STEM. So when I say take risks, I mean, you're right, it's not all about the test. And if we go through and we say, oh, well, you're going to pass the test and you're not, then we're not tapping a lot of the potential that exists in our students, especially in our English language learners and students who are, for whatever reason, a bit behind in their education, because not all students follow the same sequence. So that's an excellent question, and is absolutely about more than the test score, but that's a harder and harder sell these days when so much is being tied to those scores, everything from GPAs and scholarships to teacher evaluation and teacher pay. And in those conversations, test scores are not the sole indicator, but they're being brought in as a big part. But what's really being discussed in the educator effectiveness discussion is multiple measures. I mean, yes, that content and test scores, it's going to be a piece. It's going to be there. The growth, however we're going to do it, we're not going to get around it. It's going to be there. And that's troublesome because, you know, for a class like mine, I have a test. It's kind of easy to do. But what about all these untested areas? Like, what does that look like for 4th grade art or PE, and how's that going to tie in? But it's going to be there, one way or the other. They haven't figured it all out yet. But you know, they're looking at a lot of other different things in terms of how teachers, you know, effectively manage their classes and how they relate to students and all of this. But see, I think the real sticking point of the issue is that we're limiting ourselves by using the term effective in the first place. Because I don't strive to be an effective teacher. I strive to be an extraordinary teacher. And I have from the beginning. And I think the problem with the effectiveness discussion is that we're trying to figure out how to put it on a piece of paper in a rubric. We're trying to code it. because it's got to be fair and understandable and transparent and concrete and all that. When really what we want, and I say the collective we, when you think about what people want from their teachers, they don't just want effective. They want that magical teacher who can inspire and again, teach students all these skills to see beyond themselves, all these intangible things that we want so badly from our teachers that never finds its way onto the checklist. And I think there are different ways we can go about that. I mean, for example, in my own experience as an educator, I've never been asked, until I started the Teacher of the Year program, what do you do that you consider special? What do you do to connect with kids? I've been asked what committees I've been on and what courses I've taken for my professional development, but nobody ever really asked me, how do you get 100 kids in AP chemistry? What is your philosophy? What do you say? What do you do? And I think we need to take it to that next level. Whatever this next educator effectiveness is going to look like has to account for the intangibles, because otherwise we will never have that higher model of what we want our teachers to be, so that people even know what to strive for, that we're always kind of limited by something that goes on paper. And that's kind of what I'm trying to push in the discussion. But it's far from over. I mean, most states are just still wading through what they're going to do and what they're going to pilot, and it's all very tentative and still very much in the works. That's a great question. Sure, absolutely. I think I saw that right away when I worked with the students, at the School for the Deaf. I think that students who are in particular missing one sense are that much more in tune with their other senses. And I noticed, for example, I taught 5 years at Urbana High School hearing students, okay? And they reacted to things in a certain way in the lab. When I went to the School for the Deaf, doing the same labs, those students saw things that my other students never saw, that I never saw. Because they were so much more in tune with the visual and just the hands-on nature that they tapped into aspects that I overlooked, or that my hearing students frankly didn't appreciate. So yes, I would say, especially in the case where students are missing a sense, that they're that much more in tune with their other senses, and that enables them to experience to an even greater degree. Another example would be a student who has severe dysgraphia, which means they have a lot of writing processing difficulties. Those students are often very verbal, and they participate extensively in class. And just by participating and hearing your own voice and asking questions and trying to process things verbally brought them a whole different understanding than students who were just used to, reading and writing it and reading and writing it and never heard it in their own voice because they didn't participate to the extent that they probably should have. So I think, yes, there's always some overcompensation when there's a limitation, and often that benefits the student. Honestly, I think the most exceptional teachers are the ones who really reach beyond their content area and even reach beyond the skills that we talk about and really focus on the interpersonal relationships with the students. And I know that sounds very muddy and murky, and relationships, that's the key. I mean, it's the teachers who can really find a way in a class of 36 to make a student feel like they're the only one in the class. I mean, that's really magical, and it's very tricky to pull off, but there are teachers who do it, and I know that they can because I often read recommendations that students have written about teachers, and they'll often say things like that. That teacher made me feel like the only person in the class. It kind of goes beyond even caring. It's just to make somebody feel that special and to be that in tune. And very interesting, those students often say, I really don't know what it is about that teacher that makes everybody want to work so hard. Again, it's that intangible factor. I mean, there are just people who are very gifted and really born to do this job. And that's really special. And it's something that can be emulated, again, if we focus on it. If we focus on it and realize the importance of relationships. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.